he just said that this goes back to connection to a bill passed in 1993. There actually have been plans to and attempts to incorporate public service going back, as I said, really decades. But the one he's addressing goes back, this was, I said, is from 2009.
Through volunteer and community service programs, tens of millions of Americans of different generations have become inspired to build stronger, more vibrant communities, to help children succeed in school and rebuild cities in times of disaster. More than 61 million Americans gave back to their communities through service.
They're not polite in Congress, they can still talk. They're not supposed to be.
Members on the majority side, please take their conversations off the floor or to the cloakroom.
You can still talk.
No.
Gentlemen,
The Give Act
Nobody else
recognizes
is
this
supposed to
growing
be.
service movement
He
that
has
is
full.
taking place across the nation. It builds upon the successful work being done by members of AmeriCorps, of VISTA, of the Senior Corps, and the Learning.
Those are some of the organizations. AmeriCorps, Senior Corps. Senior Corps is for older, retired adults who want to volunteer. There's a way that they can do so. AmeriCorps, again, is specialized primarily domestically for service projects. It has some international aspects to it.
The Give Act would put us on a path to increasing the number of AmeriCorps members from 75,000 to 100,000 by 2012, with a focus on engaging low-income, disadvantaged, and at-risk young people. The Give Act would also help AmeriCorps members pay for college by increasing the scholarship they earn in exchange for their service from $4,725 to $5,255 by 2012. This bill would introduce young people to community service by creating a new summer service incentive that will offer middle school and high school students the opportunity to spend a summer working to improve the communities while earning $500 toward college or college preparation. Alumni of service programs remain a valuable resource to our communities. After Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast communities, AmeriCorps alumni played a key role in relief, recovery, and rebuilding efforts on the Gulf Coast. To help tap into these resources in times of emergency, this bill would create an alumni reserve corps to service alumni with previous disaster relief experience.
Again, what this talks about is middle school and high school students. It's part of what this bill is targeting. Trying to encourage very young people in that way to spend time, in this case, as you hopefully heard, it says summers, giving back to their communities and helping in public service areas. And that they would then be credited with funds toward their college costs. They're not given $500. In case you're wondering, have a 13-year-old out there working gets fired? No, it goes into a fund that would then accumulate as a person would work each summer, hopefully, and therefore earn some money. AmeriCorps, the plan was to try to increase it to over $5,000 of a stipend, if you will, a fund that would be given to the person to use for college costs. You also receive somewhat of a stipend for AmeriCorps for wherever it is that you're sent. You actually receive a daily stipend, or I think it was paid daily, or accumulated daily, but you only receive like weekly or so. Then that would be in addition to the scholarship aspect. If you notice the dates on this, I said this came out in 2009 when this was mentioned. And he says they're trying to put all this into place by 2012, because you have to build on it. Have you heard anything about this recently? This would be, 6 years ago when Miller was making this comment, and plan should have been in fruition 3 years ago, right? Hasn't really happened.
Each year, nearly 500,000 older Americans participate in the Senior Corps programs, mentoring children of prisoners, providing independent living services to seniors, assisting victims of natural disaster, and mobilizing other volunteers. The Give Act would expand the purpose of the Senior Corps program by adding an emphasis on recruiting retired science, technology, healthcare, law enforcement, and military professionals to help with education, after school, public safety, and technology needs. I want to thank the many members on both sides of the aisle who have worked on this bill, in particular Representative McCarthy on our side of the aisle, Representative McKeon and Mr. Platts on the other side who's handling the bill today, for their leadership, well as the Service Caucus for its support. Let me also thank the Voices of Service and its member organizations, which have been invaluable in helping us develop this legislation. Service and volunteerism have played an important role in our nation's history and will continue to help us meet the challenges and the needs of our communities. This legislation reflects the important role and builds upon it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, we're not going to worry about the rest. That's just the rest of it is just the movement to where they talk back and forth on the issue. But that was proposed, as I said, 6 years ago, 2009. The plans of having everything in full implementation by 2012 hasn't really happened. Now, are those laws around still? Yes. Are they still trying to fund it? Yes, but it has not received much attention. You know, we have a budget in our country, and most of you probably know that we operate a deficit budget, right? Guess what happens with certain programs? They don't get funded. Because you have to make some decisions. What do we fund? What do we not? Where do we spend the money? We may have it listed, but if you don't spend it, then you don't have to worry about that particular deficit area. You just don't have that. You say, well, can't do this. This is one of the areas that has received some of that cut. We're just not going to fund this. It's still listed, but we don't fund it as much. Some of the groups you mentioned, such as AmeriCorps and Senior Corps, sometimes they do receive funds from private corporations and individuals. Senior Corps, many of you probably are not aware of that because you're not seniors in the sense of older adults. Have you ever heard of Meals on Wheels? Anybody here ever heard of Meals on Wheels? Where they take food to shut-ins, elderly people, etc. That's part of Senior Corps. Many of the people who work with Meals on Wheels are actually volunteers in Senior Corps. Not necessarily in this area, but in several larger cities especially, where they try to make sure that they bring that. You have some larger areas. I don't think Athens has it. I don't know if Elkhart or Palestine may have it. You have volunteers for after-school programs who come in and do reading programs or other learning programs, math tutors, and they may have seniors who come in to do that. Older people, as part of what was mentioned here, they're trying to recruit more of those STEM people who are retired, the science, technology individuals who have been retired and live in the area. Well, let's make use of their expertise. And they really try to recruit some of those into Senior Corps. And much of Senior Corps is strictly volunteer. There is no payment to them. For Meals on Wheels, often there's no payment to those people who deliver the meals. What the funds go to are providing the actual meals and the transportation of those meals. You have to pay for gas, you have to pay for food. And that's usually where most of the funds go. The people who are volunteering to deliver those rarely are paid. There's a program director and a couple of other people work that they receive some money. But many people actually drive around and do not get paid. What happens when you cut the funding? Where's the money going to come from Meals on Wheels? Well, local restaurants quite often will donate food. They'll have local food banks, churches. And any of you know about some of the churches that have local food banks, because everybody brings food. Those sometimes are accessible for Meals on Wheels. They'll get the food and they go get it and take it out to people. Some of the grocery stores will, they get those outdated, you can't sell it because it's, the date's here, it's still good. It's not bad food, it's not spoiled or anything, but they can't sell it, so it's given to the Meals on Wheels. Cook it up that day, go take it out. That happens. So it's donations in that way. There's a number of areas. But the question is, and that's part of what this bill is, about requiring people to participate in this program. Should it be less strictly the voluntary? voluntary basis, or should it be mandatory? And especially, as your book puts it, should we require young people to participate in these programs? Well, this is another video about should national service be mandatory. Again, it's not very long. This one's only about 3 minutes or so. So it's not, the other one was a little longer than that. Bipartisan means it's both parties. Okay, so it's not just Republican, not just Democrat. And we gotta get the volume going. I swear this worked earlier. Okay. Well, I can't seem to get the sound going on this one. It worked earlier, yesterday. Okay, well, don't know. I'm trying to see if it's muted here or not. Nope. Okay, well, sorry. Oh, here may be the reason. It's not appearing on the screen, is it? That's my problem. Button. I pushed it, it just didn't push. So I'm over here looking at this monitor. Maybe now we'll get sound.
Well, in our poll, we found enormous enthusiasm for the idea of a year of mandatory public service for 18 to 25-year-olds, except among 18 to 25-year-olds.
A little joke there. You know. Again, notice how they narrowed it down. Mandatory public service for 18 to 25-year-olds. Now, the other bill that you had referenced, they were talking about middle school and high school students, trying to encourage them to spend summers in the program, and then also targeting other individuals, especially senior corps area, that was mentioned. Well, this one is a discussion that was held not too long ago. I want to say it's just a couple of years ago, sponsored by USA Today, in which they discussed the idea about mandatory public service for 18 to 25-year-olds, and then as their little joke was, that was a issue that many people wanted to discuss and found it as a popular consideration except among 18 to 25-year-olds, which would be age grouping.
Most Americans over 30 thought that was they thought it was not. Our pollsters, Mark Mellman and Whit Ayers, likened it to attitudes about public transit, that it was a good idea for somebody else to do. So, Chris, what do you think, the idea of mandatory, a year of mandatory service? It could be in the military or the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or Habitat for Humanity.
You know, there's only a few things that U.S. citizens either have to or get to do. We have to pay taxes, we get to vote, we have to serve on juries. If you're male, you have to register for selective service. If you're female, you don't. But I don't know if that will change soon because of females in combat. But this idea that you volunteer in a way for service by signing up, we have that to a degree already. But we're not compelling people, we're not conscripting people into the military, we're not conscripting people into national service. Our entire military is all volunteer right now, which I think is very important, and for decades has been an all-volunteer force. So just like anyone who volunteers for AmeriCorps, who volunteers for the Peace Corps, who volunteers to run for office, everyone who served in the military, everyone in the military today, volunteered to serve. And I think that's important because many times military service inspires other types of service. As far as making it, compulsory and mandated by law, it's a difficult proposition. But maybe an easier proposition is to make it a cultural expectation, right? This idea that everybody has an opportunity to serve, and I want to interject that I was surprised at the poll that most people thought, about 2-to-1 ratio, most people thought that opportunities to serve were ample. Because there's 500,000 people that didn't get into AmeriCorps last year that would disagree with that. 580,000 people applied, about 80,000 people or 85,000 people served. And so if we had a cultural expectation that everybody spent a year or 2 years, some short-term service, in service, whether it was the military, AmeriCorps, the Peace Corps, whether it was local opportunities that are certified as bona fide national service opportunities, we would create a country where everybody served, and where, as John often says, you could walk up to somebody in a cafe and say, So where did you serve? Where did you spend your year of service? And maybe not everybody has an answer, but most people would. And I think that would lead to a better cultural view of service. And that people want to be something far bigger than themselves, and then that could elevate to even the way we feel about Congress, and understanding that just like you can serve here in Philadelphia, someone else chooses to do their service on Capitol Hill or elsewhere.
Again, that they have more to this. Each one gets a chance to talk. But as you look at the details of what he is offering, his comment about creating a cultural atmosphere about service. Do we need to do that? He said that 500, there are ample opportunities. He said, well, 500,000 people probably tell you no, there's not, because only 85,000 were chosen for a miracle. 585,000 applied, only 85,000 served. Part of that, some of those 500,000 wanted particular areas. Well, those areas were closed. They'd already been filled, so they opted not to serve. You can go back and look at those statistics. Part of it also, funds were not available to pay these people. I told you, remember, deficit budget. Certain programs get cut. Well, that's one of the ones that get cut. Okay, well, we want to send people places, but we don't have the funds, so sorry, you don't get to go. That can happen. I use the example of my former Russia, and spent 3 months there, a little over 3 months actually, I think, working, teaching English. She was a finance major, so even finance majors can teach English to other people. She asked me several questions before she met me on review language. Do not try to worry about teaching, I was just doing one of the poetry. Let's worry about verbs and how do you do subject verb agreement. And let's worry about using phrases and clauses and constructing good sentences. She went, grammar? Yes, all those grammar lessons I taught you in high school. You now have to remember them. Because that's what they need to know. Well, she was funded to Teach America. They paid her a stipend. Now, she's an individual, as I said, who felt she needed to give back. She'd gone through college with some scholarships. She also had paid her way through college, so she felt that she wanted to give back in that way. She had the guarantee of a very well-paying job. And just as soon as she finished her Teach America, this job was going to be paying her, a very handsome one. For right out of college graduate, she told me what the offered salary was. It's like, okay, you're going to take that job and you can teach America later. Because this opportunity is not going to come around again. But she felt she needed to do that. Well, what happens though with people who want to and the funds aren't available? Should public service be mandatory for young people? And should funding for public service for young people also be a priority? You can look at it that way. Because not everybody gets money. These programs don't always get the money. You'll see during football games, NFL, you'll see ties to the United Way. You've seen the United Way commercials? Okay. Those are programs that are partially funded by government, but they also require a great deal of private donorship. People contribute to the United Way. Many corporations do that. They have employees who contribute. And sometimes some corporations say for every $1 an employee will give to the United Way, they'll match it. Same thing with Big Brother, Big Sister groups, where you have those programs. And you'll see those again also. They quite often like to tie them into athletes and about serving that way. Those are programs that receive some funds from the federal government, but not always. They have to have other support. And those are also quite often volunteer situations. There are some paid positions among Big Brothers, but many of them are not. They need volunteers to come in and work with those children. And they're not paid to be a Big Brother or be a Big Sister. It's a volunteer basis. Well, where's the funding for that going to come? From those facilities that are needed, for those who have to supervise the program. You might want to look in that way, because there are a number of issues concerning that. The first article in your textbook chapter 25, page 630, is actually a speech delivered now 7 years ago, over 7 years ago actually. This was 7.5 years ago, I guess now, because it was commencement at Wesleyan University in Connecticut. President Obama was running for president at the time. He was actually Senator Obama at the time. And he was running for president for his first term. And he gives an example here. Says he has the distinct honor today of pinching for one of my personal heroes, a hero to this country, Senator Edward Kennedy. Kennedy was ill at the time. In fact, as it notes in your little handout, he passed away the next year. Ted Kennedy, as he was quite often referred to. Teddy here. He's had a very long week. He's taken so much need rest. He called me a few days. I said he's happy to be standing. He says he started looking at this. This is a quote, a message from Kennedy. This is a quote that Obama presents. To all those praying for my return to good health, I offer my heartfelt thanks. And to any who'd rather have a different result, I say, don't get your hopes up just yet. Okay, a little joke there about yourself. So, try to lighten the tension a little bit. Here it is, it's commencement speech. People are graduating from college, and what is he going to say to us? Well, you start with a joke, right? A little humorous comment. In this case, he's quoting Teddy Kennedy, saying, hey, for those people who want me to be healthy, keep praying for me, and those of you who are praying for the other result, don't keep hoping for that. I'm explaining on being best. Supposed to be a joke. The idea is that it's trying to set a mood, a tone, or whatever, but the actual substance of the rest of the speech is a much more serious comment. It is a story, because he used a little anecdotal here aspect about Ted Kennedy, and the rest of it really proves to be a story, where he talks about this. The topic is service to one's country, synonymous with the Kennedy family name and legacy, because he's using the Kennedy family. Ted Kennedy was the youngest brother of John F. Kennedy, president, who was assassinated, brother of Robert Kennedy, Senator, Attorney General of the United States, and brother of the Senator who was also assassinated as he was running for president, and then Ted Kennedy. It is a service that has continued. Currently, Carolyn Kennedy, the daughter of John F. Kennedy, is our ambassador to Japan. In case you didn't know that. Okay. Carolyn Kennedy, Salzburg. He goes on and talks about John F. Kennedy. Says that he would called a generation of Americans to ask the country what they could do. That famous quote in 60, when he was, it's actually 61 when he was inaugurated, in which he says, ask not what your country can do for you, ask rather what you can do for your country, right? And folks may have heard that. Well, that's what he's referencing here. He talks about the Peace Corps volunteers who won a generation of goodwill when America's ideals were challenged. They were the teenagers and college students, not much older than you, as he's talked to the scriptwriter, on the fire hoses, the footage of marchers beaten within an inch of their lives, who knew it was probably smarter to stay at home, but still decided to take those freedom rides down south. And because they did, they changed the world. And then he talks about the story of our everyday cares and concerns, the responsibilities we have. It says the history of this nation, says it's the story of big challenges. And it says the story that this is tells us that we are a people whose destiny has never been written for us, but by us. By generations of men and women, young and old, who have always believed that their story and the American story are not separate, but shared. It says that for more than 2 centuries they have served this country in ways that have forever enriched both. He's trying to say that it is part of the American heritage to serve. That this is something that we have always done. We haven't even thought about it. We just have done so. Because as he says, that the American story is not separate from the stories of the people in the country. Rather, they're intertwined, they're shared. That the destiny of the country is not written for us by someone else, but rather has been written by us. And then he gives a story about his own situation. Says he spent much of his childhood adrift. His father left his mother and I when I was 2. By the way, President Obama, you do not use I when we need the objective case. That should have been the word me. I would be marking his paper for him. He did not vet this through me when he gave the speech. He should have. Or the person who helped him write it should have checked. Sorry, that is not how you phrase that. My father left me, right? That's how you phrase it. Not my father left my mother and I. Sorry, wrong. So even your president needs grammar lessons. Keep that in mind. Because I mark it on your papers when I see it. So get ready. You're not alone. He's trying to sound formal. It's called actually, we have a term. It's called hypercorrection. When you interject something that you believe is the proper sound, because it creates an impression, but unfortunately it is incorrect. When my mother remarried, I lived in Indonesia for a time, but mostly raised in Hawaii by her and my grandparents from Kansas. My teenage years were filled with more than the usual dose of adolescent rebellion. And I'll admit I didn't always take myself or my studies very seriously. I realize that none of you could probably relate to this. I was talking to a group of college graduates who, they didn't take their studies seriously? Sure. Right. It's, I know that you can't understand how a college graduate, a college student would not be taking classes seriously, right? Because you folks all take it very seriously. Right? Yeah, okay. Since I realize I know you, but there were many times when I wasn't sure where I was going or what I would do. And then he talks about how his mother had taught him about the values of hard work, honesty, and empathy. Resurfaced. Says this is on page 632. I began to notice a world beyond myself. Became active in the movement to oppose the apartheid regime of South Africa. Began following debates in this country about poverty and health care. By the time I graduated from college, I was possessed with a crazy idea. I would work at a grassroots level to bring about change. And he says he wrote to different organizations. One day, a group of churches on the south side of Chicago, which he was living in Chicago at the time, offered me a job to come work as a community organizer in neighborhoods that had been devastated by steel plant closings. My mother and grandparents wanted me to go to law school. My friends were applying to jobs on Wall Street. Meanwhile, this organization offered me $12,000 a year, plus $2,000 for an old beat-up car. And I said yes. And he goes on and talks about, I didn't know it's old Chicago, because he had gone to college and he was coming there. What is this community organizing business all about? I'd always been inspired by JFK's call to service, for instance. But when I got to the south side, there were no marches, no soaring speeches. In the shadow of an empty steel plant, there were just a lot of folks, again, I got marching, who were struggling. And we didn't get very far at first. He goes on and talks about his story of community service, what he did. Says a little lady raised her hand and asked, is this where the bingo game is? Says it wasn't easy. Eventually we made progress. Day by day, block by block, we brought the community together and registered new voters, set up after-school programs, fought for new jobs, helped people live lives with some measure of dignity. Says I wasn't just helping other people. Through service, I found a community that embraced me. Citizenship that was meaningful. The direction I've been seeking. Through service, I discovered how my own improbable story fit to the larger story of America. He goes on and talks about this idea of obligation to yourself. And this is on 633, the top of the page. Because our individual salvation depends on collective salvation. Because thinking only about yourself, fulfilling your immediate wants and needs, betrays a poverty of ambition. Because it's only when you hitch your wagon to something larger than yourself that you realize your true potential and discover the role you'll play in writing the next great chapter in American story. He concludes this, again, on page 635, with an image of another individual, an older man, he says, just before he left Fort Chicago. Says this old man said, I'll give you a bit of advice. Forget this community organizing business, do something that's going to make you some money. You can't change the world. People won't appreciate you trying. But you got a nice voice, so you should think about going into television broadcasting. I'm telling you, you've got a future. See, now he may have been right about the TV thing, but he was wrong about everything else. But that old man has not seen what I have seen. He has not seen the faces of ordinary people. First time they clear a vacant lot or build a new playground or force an unresponsive leader to provide service to their community. He has not seen the face of a child brighten because of an inspiring teacher or mentor. He has not seen scores of young people educate their parents on issues like Darfur, or mobilize the conscience of a nation around the challenge of climate change. He has not seen lines of men and women that wrap around schools and churches, that stretch block after block just so they could make their voices heard, many for the first time. And then, conclusion. This is all I ask of you on this joyous day of new beginnings. That is what Senator Kennedy asks of you as well. That is how we will keep so much needed work going. The cause of justice everlasting, the dream alive for generations to come. And that's how he concludes that. He says, thank you. The issue then becomes, as he uses his story of what he is seeing.
Your
personal
conference is
experience.
scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
Yes, we know. That's why I cut off part of it. This idea that he is trying to convey to this new generation the need to be willing to give back. He was told by an older man, you got a future in television, I think. You got a good voice. Go into broadcasting. And he says he was right about some, but wrong about others. Because of what he, Obama, would see in his time of service in Chicago. And he recognized he could make a difference. And that individuals working together can make that difference. Do we need to mandate service then? So that everyone will recognize that we have an obligation to our community? Or do we have that obligation? Is that really what we need to consider? Next time when you come back for class, I want you to be thinking about that question. Do we have an obligation to our communities? That's a yes or no question, so it's a very simple answer. Of course, be aware that I will ask follow-up questions to that. But I want you to think about it. Do we have an obligation to our community to serve it in some way? For those of you who are in the Pinnacle program, for instance, those of you who are taking classes at high school, for which you have not had to pay, what are you giving back for that program, for that benefit? What have you provided? Could you do something? Well, that's a question. Do we have an obligation to serve? President Obama, in this speech when he was Senator Obama, offers a comment saying that you gain when you give, to use the expression that way. We're going to talk about it. Do you really? Do we need to do that?
Your conference is now over. Goodbye.
So there we go. We will see you folks next time.